Think back to the height of the Cold War, a time when the world stood on a knife's edge, gripped by paranoia, secrecy, and an unrelenting race for dominance. Behind the Iron Curtain and within the fortified halls of the Pentagon, scientists and strategists weren't just competing for nuclear supremacy, they were chasing something far more extraordinary. Classified documents buried under layers of redacted ink whispered of a project so audacious it defied the limits of known science. Code named Seraphim, it wasn't just another weapons program or spy satellite. This was an attempt to reach beyond our solar system, to crack the secrets of interstellar travel while the world's attention was fixed on earthly conflicts. Imagine for a moment the sheer scale of this ambition. In an era when computers filled entire rooms and astronauts were still learning to survive in low Earth orbit, a handful of visionaries dared to dream of crossing the cosmic void. Classified test flights, anomalous radar signatures, and whispered accounts from retired engineers all point to something inexplicable, a shadow history of human ingenuity operating far beyond public view. What if we did unlock the stars during those tense decades? What if the greatest achievement in human history was buried not in textbooks but in a vault? This is the untold story of Project Seraphim, a secret so closely guarded that even now, decades later, the full truth remains locked away. Tonight, we're peeling back the layers of deception, sifting through declassified files, and piecing together the fragments of a puzzle that could rewrite our understanding of the 20th century. From mysterious disappearances of top aerospace engineers to leaked Soviet archives hinting at impossible propulsion systems, the clues are scattered like stardust. Strap in, what you're about to hear isn't just history, it's a revelation. The late 1950s were a fever dream of scientific ambition and Cold War desperation. The Soviet Union had just stunned the world with Sputnik, a beeping metal sphere soaring through the heavens, and suddenly, America's technological dominance was in question. But while the public panicked over a communist satellite, hidden corners of the U.S. government were chasing something far more radical. In whispered meetings between Pentagon officials and aerospace titans, a new kind of arms race was taking shape. Not for bigger missiles or deadlier warheads, but for a technology so advanced it bordered on science fiction, the ability to leave our solar system entirely. Declassified CIA memos from this era reveal cryptic references to something called off-world research. These weren't just theoretical musings, they were budget line items tucked between missile defense programs and psychological operations. One heavily redacted document from 1959 mentions a joint initiative between defense contractors and an undisclosed international partner, with objectives listed only as propulsion breakthrough and material acquisition. The timing is chilling. This was the same year President Eisenhower allegedly held closed-door meetings with Lockheed and Douglas aircraft executives, not about rockets or spy planes, but about something referred to in one leaked memo as exotic locomotion systems. The shadows grow darker when you connect these dots to another infamous Cold War project, MK-Ultra. Officially, MK-Ultra was the CIA's mind control program, testing LSD and sensory deprivation on unwitting subjects. But buried in its labyrinth of sub-projects was a lesser-known branch called Artichoke, which explored altered states of consciousness for extreme environment adaptability. What did consciousness have to do with interstellar travel? Former Seraphim researchers, speaking anonymously in later years, hinted at rumors of pilots subjected to sensory overload tests, as if preparing them for something beyond Earth's atmosphere. Were they trying to cheat physics or the human mind itself? Then there's the paper trail, or rather, the fragments left behind. A 1962 Air Force report, declassified decades later, describes a failed experiment labeled Seraphim Alpha. The details are blacked out, but the appendix includes equations for field displacement and a handwritten note reading "No Newtonian solution." Another document, smuggled out of a Soviet archive in the 90s, mentions a joint aerospace anomaly observed over Kazakhstan in 1964 with radar returns inconsistent with known aircraft. Coincidence or evidence that both superpowers were chasing the same impossible dream and might have gotten closer than we ever knew? The birth of Project Seraphim wasn't just about beating the Russians to space. It was about rewriting the rules of reality itself, and as we'll soon see, the deeper you dig, the clearer it becomes. Someone, somewhere, may have succeeded. But at what cost? The whispers of Project Seraphim didn't stay confined to classified memos or locked vaults forever. Like steam escaping a pressurized chamber, fragments of the truth began seeping out through the most unexpected cracks, human ones. Take Ben Rich, the legendary Lockheed Martin Skunk Works director, who famously told an audience of engineers in 1993, "We already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out." He punctuated it with a chilling addendum: the U.S. has had the technology to take ET home for decades. Was this just provocative showmanship from a man who'd spent his career teasing the limits of aerospace? Or was it a breadcrumb, one of many deliberately left by insiders who couldn't stay silent? Then there's the case of Soviet defector Vladimir Tzisky, a Bulgarian engineer who fled to the West with stacks of documents in the early 90s. His claims sounded like pure fantasy: secret Soviet bases on the moon, reverse-engineered alien craft, and propulsion systems that manipulated gravity itself. But buried in his wilder assertions were eerily specific technical details, blueprints for something called a torsion field generator, later found cited in declassified East German research papers. Even more intriguing, Tzisky insisted the Soviets hadn't developed these ideas alone. He spoke of joint U.S.-USSR experiments in Siberia during the Cold War's thaw, where scientists allegedly tested mass reduction devices under the guise of weather research. The timing lines up with a curious gap in both nations' aerospace logs. 1987, the same year physicist Eugene Podkletnov made waves with an experiment that shouldn't have worked. Podkletnov's breakthrough, or what little survived the immediate suppression, was simple in concept but earth-shattering in implication. While studying superconducting ceramics at a Finnish university, he claimed his rotating disc apparatus had somehow shielded objects beneath it from gravity's pull. Not counteracted it with thrust or magnetism, but bent it. Peer review dismissed his results as measurement error, but military labs took note. A 1992 Boeing patent application referenced gravity modification, using methods suspiciously similar to Podkletnov's setup. Even NASA quietly launched its own breakthrough propulsion physics program shortly after, only to shutter it without explanation. The paper trail here is thin by design, but the connections are undeniable. Perhaps the most damning testimony comes from a man known only as J.R. in aerospace circles, a self-described former Skunk Works engineer. He surfaced in 2014 with photos of a bizarre aircraft prototype, a wedge-shaped craft with no visible wings or exhaust. His story, that Lockheed had been testing field propulsion vehicles since the 70s, powered by something called a MHD drive, magneto-hydrodynamic manipulation of spacetime itself. Skeptics called it a hoax until declassified CIA files from 2017 confirmed the Pentagon had indeed investigated hypothetical propulsion methods involving electromagnetic vacuum engineering. The language was dense, bureaucratic, but the implication was clear. Someone, somewhere, was chasing the very science Seraphim's architects had dreamed of. What binds these threads together isn't just the staggering claims, but the patterns of suppression that followed. Podkletnov's lab was abruptly shuttered. Terziski's documents vanished from European archives. Even Ben Rich's explosive comments were quickly walked back by Lockheed PR, dismissed as metaphorical. Yet the sheer volume of overlapping accounts from both sides of the Iron Curtain suggests something more than coincidence. If Seraphim was truly buried, why does its shadow keep reappearing in the unlikeliest places? And who stands to gain by ensuring we dismiss it all as conspiracy? The answers may lie not in the documents we've found, but in the ones still missing. The story of Project Seraphim takes an even darker turn when we trace its roots back to the ashes of World War II, specifically to the shadowy transfer of Nazi scientists under Operation Paperclip. While most know this program brought rocketry pioneers like Wernher von Braun to America, few realize the deeper, stranger truths buried in their personal archives. Von Braun's declassified Chinese letter ENTRIES, for instance, contain baffling references to interstellar propulsion concepts as early as 1946, years before Sputnik. One particularly cryptic note from 1948 describes a theoretical energy torsion field that could, in his words, fold space without mass displacement. These weren't the musings of a man focused solely on ballistic missiles. Then there's the infamous Bell UFO Glock, a device so shrouded in myth that even hardened researchers debate its existence. According to Polish military journalist Igor Witkowski, who gained access to previously classified SS files in the 90s, this bell-shaped apparatus was the Nazis' most secret wartime project. Witnesses described it as emitting a strange glow, causing time dilation effects in nearby personnel, and even levitating during tests. When the Allies overran Germany, key components and the scientists behind them vanished. Decades later, a 1967 CIA memo flagged recovered German inertial reduction technology being tested at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The timing coincides with Seraphim's early phases, begging the question, was the Bell's rumored anti-gravity effect the missing piece that made interstellar research seem suddenly plausible? The links grow harder to ignore when you examine the Paperclip recruits' post-war assignments. Herbert Wagner, a former Junkers engineer specializing in high-frequency physics, was quietly placed at Douglas Aircraft's Advanced Concepts Group, the same division that later contributed to Seraphim's propulsion studies. Declassified memos show Wagner's team received priority access to captured German research on rotational plasma systems, a phrase mirroring descriptions of the Bell's inner workings. Even more telling, a redacted 1955 Air Force report mentions a crystalline fuel substrate recovered from Peenemünde, the Nazis' V-2 rocket base, being tested for energy density beyond chemical limits. The same report lists a then-unknown physicist named Dr. Richard Nowak as lead investigator. Cross-reference that name with Operation Paperclip's passenger manifests, and you'll find a Richard Nowak arriving in New Mexico in 1946 with no public record of his work until that very document. Perhaps the most chilling evidence lies in the gaps, the documents that should exist but don't. Von Braun's personal correspondence from the 50s references multiple meetings at a facility simply called Site Omega, yet no official record of this location has ever surfaced. Similarly, the Bell's lead engineer, SS officer Hans Kammler, disappeared entirely after the war. Some historians claim he struck a deal with U.S. intelligence, others allege Soviet forces captured him. But a 1998 German archival leak contained a curious footnote. Kammler's last known action was authorizing the transfer of 7 freight cars from an underground factory in Poland to an unlisted destination. The cargo, listed only as Forschungsmaterial Sternenbrecher, Starbreaker research material, coincidence again, or the first breadcrumb in a trail leading straight to Seraphim's darkest secrets? What emerges from this tangled web isn't just the story of a hidden space race. It's the possibility that both superpowers, in their desperation to outmaneuver each other, may have weaponized the unthinkable, remnants of a technology so advanced its origins still defy explanation. And if that's true, the questions multiply: whose ideas were they really? And how far did we go to keep them silent? Money has a way of leaving fingerprints even when it vanishes into the dark. Take the $2 trillion that simply disappeared from Pentagon ledgers between 1996 and 2015. That's not a typo, 2 trillion. To put that in perspective, it's enough to fund NASA for over 200 years at current budget levels. Yet when auditors tried tracking it, they hit wall after wall: classified codes, redirected contracts, and whole departments that didn't officially exist. One former defense analyst described it as trying to map a shadow. But shadows, when you study them closely, still hint at the shape of what's hidden. Enter Site S4, a facility so deeply buried in Nevada's desert that even its name sounds like a classified afterthought. Satellite images show a cluster of hangars near Groom Lake, far larger than Area 51's infamous runways, yet absent from any official maps. Aviation insiders whisper about strange flight patterns there, not the darting triangles of stealth drones, but massive cargo planes arriving at odd hours, their bellies full of unmarked crates. Even stranger, the paper trail. Procurement records reveal millions funneled through shell companies for advanced materials testing, yet no peer-reviewed research ever surfaces. One leaked invoice from 2012 lists a shipment of beryllium-copper alloy discs to a recipient called Project Longbow. Cross-reference that with declassified memos, and you'll find Longbow was a Seraphim subprogram studying, wait for it, rotational field propulsion. But the smoking gun might lie farther north. Declassified Soviet-era maps pinpoint a remote Arctic complex codenamed Meteora 3, where thermal imaging reveals heat signatures inconsistent with any known generator technology. Recent commercial satellites show expansions, a new runway carved into permafrost, its orientation all wrong for conventional aircraft. Then there's the oddest detail: no fuel depots. No storage tanks, just a single massive dome emitting faint electromagnetic disturbances. A 2019 Norwegian intelligence report flagged anomalous auroral activity over the site, coinciding with spikes in Russian military comms using phrases like phase test and containment protocol. The real kicker: budget crossovers. A 2005 CIA assessment noted financial bleed over between black projects and foreign counterparts, specifically a $17 million disbursement to a Swiss aerospace firm that later supplied components to both S4 and Meteora. Follow the money far enough and the lines between enemies blur. Maybe that's the ultimate secret of Seraphim. In the race to crack the stars, the Cold War's fiercest rivals might have been running the same playbook. So where does $2 trillion go? Maybe not into a single vault, but scattered across a global web of facilities chasing the same impossible dream, one where the rules of physics aren't laws but obstacles to be broken. And if that's true, the real question isn't whether they succeeded, it's who else was paying attention. December 8, 1965, a fireball streaked across the skies over Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, so bright it cast shadows in broad daylight. Witnesses described something strange, not the usual meteoric breakup, but an object moving with eerie precision before crashing near the rural town of Kecksburg. Military cordoned off the area within hours, hauling away what locals claimed was a metallic, acorn-shaped craft covered in strange hieroglyphics. Official explanations: a meteor, but the details don't add up. Start with the shape. That distinctive acorn design, thick at the base, tapering to a rounded tip, matches no known aircraft of the era. Yet compare it to later NASA concepts like the 2012 Mars Sample Return Lander prototype, and the resemblance is uncanny. Both share that same bulbous profile, optimized for atmospheric re-entry. Even stranger, declassified Seraphim schematics from the 70s reference a Bell capacitor hole for high-energy plasma containment, illustrated with nearly identical contours. Coincidence or evidence of a lineage stretching back decades? Then there's the military response. Unlike typical meteor recoveries handled by geologists, Kecksburg drew Army officers in unmarked trucks. Witnesses reported men in radiation suits loading a shrouded object under nightfall. A local paper's photographer claimed soldiers confiscated his film at gunpoint. The Pentagon's official report: lost, misfiled, gone. But a 1991 FOIA request uncovered an Air Force telex sent that night, classifying the event under a header usually reserved for nuclear incidents: Operation Blue Fly. This wasn't just a retrieval program, it was the Pentagon's protocol for capturing foreign technology. The question is whose. The timing is even more damning. Kecksburg occurred just months after Gemini astronauts began reporting unexplained phenomena. Declassified cockpit recordings from Gemini 4 capture pilot Jim McDivitt describing a white cylindrical object with arms sticking out, maneuvering independently near their capsule. Ground control's response switched to secure channel. Similar encounters peppered later missions, with astronauts like Frank Borman on Gemini 7 spotting multiple bogies that defied conventional explanation. NASA public stance: high-altitude ice crystals. Privately, their own telemetry specialists disagreed. Notes from Langley Research Center admitted the objects matched no known orbital debris profiles. Perhaps the most chilling detail comes from an unexpected source: the Soviet Union. 1967 KGB memos unearthed after the Cold War reference an American aerospace loss in late '65, with reconnaissance satellites detecting unusual radioactivity near Kecksburg. The documents speculate about a prototype propulsion failure, noting similarities to their own ill-fated experiments with plasma compression drives. One scientist's handwritten margin note asks, "Did they succeed where we burned? What if Kecksburg wasn't a meteor or even extraterrestrial? What if it was a fragment of Seraphim, a test vehicle pushed beyond its limits?" The acorn shape, the classified recovery, the astronaut sightings, all threads pointing to a truth far stranger than fiction. That fireball may have been our first glimpse of humanity reaching for the stars, and the cost of such ambition burning up on re-entry. The real mystery isn't what fell that night, it's how much further the program went before the flames caught up. The concept of time dilation is no stranger to science fiction: warp drives bending spacetime, wormholes connecting distant galaxies. But what if these ideas weren't just speculative? Buried in the archives of Cold War space programs are eerie accounts that blur the line between physics and the unexplained. Take the Voskhod missions, the Soviet Union's ambitious follow-up to their early space triumphs. Officially, these flights were meant to test multi-crew spacecraft and conduct biomedical research. Yet declassified CIA files from the late 1960s tell a different story, one of cosmonauts returning to Earth with unaccounted gaps in their mission logs. One particularly cryptic report details a 2,500-page dossier on temporal anomalies experienced during Voskhod 2. According to intercepted Soviet communications, pilot Alexei Linov, already famous for the first spacewalk, reported a bizarre incident where his onboard chronometer suddenly lagged 47 seconds behind ground control's atomic clock. Routine, perhaps, except the discrepancy vanished upon re-entry, with no technical malfunction ever identified. Even stranger, fellow cosmonaut Pavel Belyaev allegedly experienced visual discontinuities during the same flight, moments where the stars outside his viewport appeared to stutter like a film reel skipping frames. The CIA's analysis of these events, buried under layers of redactions, contains one startling passage. Comparative data matches theoretical models of Einstein-Rosen bridge transit. In layman's terms, they were referencing wormholes, hypothetical tunnels through spacetime. the document goes further, suggesting these anomalies weren't accidental. A marginal note, likely added by an analyst, reads, "Seraphim protocols, the implication. These glitches might have been early field tests of technology, designed not just to travel through space but through time itself." Parallels to another infamous experiment are impossible to ignore. Decades earlier, rumors swirled about the U.S. Navy's Philadelphia experiment, an alleged attempt to render a destroyer invisible using electromagnetic fields. While officially dismissed as myth, declassified Office of Naval Research documents from 1950 confirm they were indeed testing degaussing techniques to reduce magnetic signatures. But witness testimonies tell a darker tale. Sailors supposedly phased out of existence, some merging with bulkheads, others claiming to have jumped hours forward in time. One engineer's private journal, uncovered in 2003, described the event as a localized space-time rupture, the connective tissue between these incidents. Both involve manipulating fundamental forces, gravity, electromagnetism, in ways that ripple across time, and both coincide with periods where Seraphim's shadow loomed largest. Soviet astrophysicist Kirill Pavlovich Florensky hinted at this in a 1983 lecture, later scrubbed from Academy records. "Certain propulsion systems," he said, "don't move through space so much as rearrange its coordinates." Then there's the chilling case of Voskhod 3, a mission that never officially happened. Western tracking stations logged its launch in October 1966, but Soviet media remained silent. Days later, a garbled transmission intercepted by a Norwegian listening post contained a single phrase repeated, "The light is wrong." No wreckage was ever reported. No cosmonauts declared lost, yet in 2011, a retired KGB archivist leaked autopsy photos of 3 men in flight suits, their skin exhibiting bizarre accelerated aging, wrinkled, sunken features inconsistent with their documented ages. The date stamped on the file, October 12, 1966. Whether these were tragic accidents or deliberate experiments remains unclear, but the pattern is undeniable. Wherever Seraphim's fingerprints appear, time itself seems to warp. The question isn't just whether they cracked the secrets of space-time, it's whether they fully understood the price of wielding them. Dr. John Brandenburg was a respected plasma physicist working with NASA, a Clementine mission, when he stumbled onto something that would derail his mainstream credibility and redefine the search for extraterrestrial life. In 2011, he published a paper that sent shockwaves through the scientific community, arguing that Mars bore the scars of a planet-wide cataclysm. Not some slow death by atmospheric erosion, but something far more chilling, evidence of thermonuclear explosions. His analysis of isotopic ratios in the Martian soil, particularly the abundance of xenon-129, pointed to a signature eerily similar to Earth's own nuclear test sites. But the real bombshell, the epicenter of this devastation, matched precisely with a region long shrouded in mystery: Cydonia, the so-called face on Mars. Brandenburg's claims might have been dismissed as fringe, if not for the stubborn anomalies in NASA-owned data. Enhanced images from the 1976 Viking orbiter revealed geometric formations around Cydonia that defied natural explanation. Mile-wide pyramids with precise alignment, crumbling but unmistakably angular structures resembling fortified walls. Most haunting of all, a formation often called the D and M pyramid, its 5-sided symmetry mirroring sacred geometry found in ancient Earth civilizations. Conspiracy theorists had fixated on these features for decades, but Brandenburg brought something new to the table: hard science. His models suggested the nuclear isotopes weren't just present, they were distributed in a pattern consistent with targeted strikes. As if something or someone had methodically erased a civilization. Now, here's where Seraphim's shadow creeps into the story. 1972, 4 years before Viking, a top-secret memorandum circulated among a select group at the Pentagon, detailing an unmanned probe dubbed Observer 12. Officially, it was another deep space radiation experiment, but according to retired aerospace engineer Sam Thayer, who worked at Lockheed's Black Projects division, Observer 12's real destination was Mars. Specifically, Cydonia. Thayer's accounts, pieced together from interviews before his death in 2019, describe a spacecraft equipped with sensors far beyond anything NASA had publicly. Gamma-ray spectrometers capable of detecting minute nuclear residues, high-resolution cameras with classified adaptive optics. The kicker, its trajectory didn't match any publicly disclosed Mars missions. Declassified budget logs from that era show a sudden, unexplained surge in funding for the Air Force's Advanced Reconnaissance Office, a cover name Thayer claimed for Seraphim's deep space operations. The timing aligns with a curious anomaly noted by Soviet astronomers, a brief but intense radar echo from Mars orbit in late '72, lasting just 48 hours before vanishing. Coincidence, perhaps, but consider this. Brandenburg's later work referenced anomalous gamma-ray signatures in Cydonia's soil that couldn't be explained by natural uranium deposits alone. His conclusion, the isotopes were too fresh, as if whatever cataclysm occurred had happened not millions of years ago, but within recent memory. The implications are staggering. If Brandenburg is right, if Mars once hosted intelligent life, and if that life was wiped out by nuclear fire, then Seraphim's alleged mission takes on a horrifying new dimension. Were we just exploring, or were we following a trail of cosmic breadcrumbs, piecing together a warning from the ashes of a dead world? The answers, if they exist, might still be buried in those grainy Viking images, or locked away in a vault labeled with a single word, Observer 12. Among the most unsettling rumors tied to Project Seraphim is the alleged Living Astronauts program, a supposed initiative where military personnel were signed onto 20-year tours of duty not on Earth but in deep space. The most infamous case centers on a man calling himself Captain K, who surfaced in 2014 with documents claiming he'd spent 17 years defending a secret Mars colony. His story sounded like pure sci-fi fantasy until researchers examined the evidence he brought with him. The most baffling piece, his radiation-burned military ID cards. Forensic analysis revealed isotopes consistent with prolonged exposure to cosmic rays far beyond Earth's protective magnetosphere. Even more disturbing was the insignia, an eagle clutching a Martian globe encircled by Latin text translating to the stars through hardship. Aerospace historians recognized it instantly. The design matched a logo sketched in a 1988 Air Force memo regarding deep space deployment protocols. That document, declassified in 2009, had been heavily redacted except for one chilling line. Personnel rotation cycles must account for relativistic dilation. K's account grew harder to dismiss when cross-referenced with other anomalies. In 1989, astronomer Robert Harrington discovered unexpected perturbations in Mars orbit fluctuations that suggested gravitational interference from something massive nearby. Harrington died suddenly months later, his notes vanishing from naval archives. Then there's the curious case of the Mars Observer spacecraft, which mysteriously failed just before orbital insertion in 1993. NASA claimed a fuel line rupture, but telemetry data leaked years later showed a final transmission mentioning unexpected thermal blooms near Cydonia. Perhaps the most damning corroboration comes from an unexpected source: Soviet-era medical files. A 2017 leak revealed autopsy reports on 3 cosmonauts whose bodies displayed advanced osteoporosis and radiation damage inconsistent with their age. The official cause of death was listed as training accident, yet their personal logs referenced a place called LK3, later identified as a code name for a proposed Soviet Mars outpost in 1984 planning documents. Captain K's story may never be fully verified, but the paper trail paints a disturbing picture. If even a fraction of his claims are true, the implications are staggering. Who or what were these astronauts really defending against, and why does the timeline of these events align so perfectly with Seraphim's darkest chapters? The answers may lie not in the stars, but in the classified vaults we've yet to crack. The human body was never designed for interstellar travel. Every cell, every nerve, every bone evolved under Earth's gentle gravity and atmosphere. So when whispers emerged about Seraphim's so-called enhanced pilots, the implications were staggering. What if cracking the stars wasn't just about building better engines, but rebuilding us? Leaked schematics from a Pentagon contractor in 1998 offer the first tangible clue. Pages of biomechanical implants, from reinforced spinal columns to synthetic myomer fibers woven into muscle tissue. The accompanying notes describe these modifications as necessary for inertial compensation during non-linear acceleration. Translation: surviving forces that would turn an ordinary person to pulp. This wasn't science fiction, it was a direct extension of real-world black projects. Take MK Naomi, the CIA-DARPA collaboration that weaponized biology during the Cold War. Officially shut down in 1970, its research into neural augmentation and physiological hardening mysteriously resurfaced in Air Force documents 2 decades later. One 1993 memo references Project Grey Mercury, testing spinal shunt implants on volunteers from Fort Detrick's Special Operations Division. The goal: to prevent blackouts during extreme G-forces. Sound familiar? Compare those documents to the sketches leaked by a former Seraphim technician. A human spine fused with what appears to be a lattice of superconducting filaments labeled Type K biodynamic stabilizer. The resemblance is uncanny. Then there's the Soviet counterpart. Declassified KGB files from 1982 detail Zenit 9, a program that allegedly used electromagnetic cranial implants to protect cosmonauts from psychophysiological disruptions during prolonged exo-atmospheric transit. One harrowing account describes a test subject identified only as Patient S, surviving 72 hours in a centrifuge simulating warp speed turbulence, a feat impossible without augmentation. The kicker: his post-experiment EEG showed brainwave patterns inconsistent with baseline human neurology. The most chilling evidence, though, might be hiding in plain sight. Modern patents tell a disturbing story. Google USPTO 8-784-214, a 2014 filing for a neural interface system by a defense subcontractor. The diagrams show a mesh of microelectrodes enveloping the spinal cord, nearly identical to those Seraphim sketches. The stated purpose: facilitating human-machine symbiosis in high-stress environments. Buried in the technical jargon is one telling phrase: enabling consciousness retention during discontinuous space-time transitions. What were they preparing these pilots for? The answer might lie in an obscure NASA experiment from 2005. Astronauts on the ISS reported fleeting moments of temporal disorientation during plasma sheath test seconds where their perception of time seemed to stretch or compress. One crew member described it as watching the universe stutter. Coincidence or proof that Seraphim's architects knew the real barrier wasn't distance but the fragility of the human mind itself? The implants, the augmented spines, the neural rewiring, all desperate measures to survive a truth we're still not ready to face. The stars don't just bend space. They break those who try to reach them. Berlin's Grunwald forest holds more than just ancient oaks and rustling leaves. Its hollowed-out trunks were once the silent couriers of the Cold War's most explosive secrets. Among the moss-covered bark and tangled roots, Soviet handlers and Western intelligence agents played a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, passing messages without ever crossing paths. But not all those secrets were about troop movements or political defections. Some, hidden in weatherproof capsules no larger than a cigarette, contained scribbles that defied conventional physics. Equations point to something called an Alcubierre metric, a theoretical warp drive concept decades ahead of its time. The technique was textbook tradecraft, a nail driven into a tree at a precise angle, its head hollowed to hold microfilm. Known as dead drops, these unassuming markers allowed information to change hands without direct contact. Former KGB courier Dmitry Volkov, speaking anonymously in 2019, described retrieving one such capsule near the Glienik Bridge, the infamous Bridge of Spies. What stood out wasn't the location but the contents. Most drops were troop deployments or embassy blueprints, he recalled. This, pages of tensor calculus with notes in English and Russian. The handlers told us to treat it like plutonium. If compromised, burn it and scatter the ashes in water. The equations matched verbatim with physicist Miguel Alcubierre's 1994 paper on faster-than-light travel, except these were dated 1968, predating his work by 26 years. Worse, they included corrections to his published theory. One marginal note partially erased read, "Tested at 30% efficiency, Arkhangelsk facility." Arkhangelsk, home to the USSR's most advanced aerospace research lab, where witnesses reported strange, low-frequency hums shaking the ground in the 70s. Declassified Stasi files add another layer. A 1983 memo warns of unauthorized technical exchanges between East German scientists and a visiting NAS, a delegation specifically mentioning propulsion geometry being smuggled via natural repositories. That same year, West Berlin police found a mutilated corpse near a known drop tree, his pockets stuffed with pages of differential equations. The case was closed as a robbery, but the victim's employer raised eyebrows, a subsidiary of Messerschmitt Bell Kaublohm, a firm later linked to Germany's own black-budget aerospace projects. What were these equations really for? The answer might lie in a forgotten CIA asset codenamed Propman. Declassified in 2011, his reports describe a Soviet prototype codenamed Polya RNAya Zverya ZDA Polar Star, allegedly capable of local space-time contraction. One haunting line stands out. Their math is cleaner than ours. They've seen it work. The trees are silent now, but their hollows still whisper of a truth too explosive for daylight, that the Cold War's greatest race wasn't for the moon but for the stars themselves. And some secrets, it seems, were never meant to take root. Antarctica has always been a land of extremes, bitter cold, endless ice, and secrets buried deep beneath its frozen surface. But in 1946, just months after World War II ended, the United States launched an operation so massive it defied all logic. Officially dubbed Operation High Jump, the mission was billed as a routine training exercise to test military equipment in polar conditions. Yet the scale told a different story. 13 ships, including an aircraft carrier, over 4,000 personnel, and enough supplies for a 6-month deployment, all racing to the southern continent under the command of Admiral Richard Byard, a man who'd already made history by flying over both poles. The public explanation: they were hunting for meteorite samples, but classified memos from the era tell a far stranger tale. Buried in Byard's personal diary, later recovered by researchers, are passages that read like something from a sci-fi pulp novel. The objects emerged from the ice mist, he wrote on February 19, 1947. Flying discs moving at velocities no aircraft of ours could match. They appeared to be guided by intelligence. These weren't vague sightings. Byard's entries describe formations of craft executing precise maneuvers, even reacting to his own plane's movements as if engaged in some unspoken aerial ballet. What makes these notes particularly chilling is their timing. Just 2 days later, High Jump was abruptly cut short, its fleet recalled with no explanation, leaving behind equipment worth millions. Navy press releases blamed harsh weather, yet meteorological records from that week show clear skies over Queen Maud Land, their primary survey zone. The real smoking gun lies in a declassified British intelligence report from 1951, which references a joint German Antarctic expedition during the war's final months. According to these documents, Nazi scientists had been obsessed with Queen Maud Land, dispatching multiple teams under the guise of meteorological research. One cipher, decoded by Bletchley Park, mentioned a crystalline energy source buried in the ice, a phrase eerily similar to Seraphim's later research into zero-point energy. Even more damning, Bayard's own post-mission debrief leaked in the 70s, where he reportedly warned Pentagon officials about an advanced civilization operating beneath the ice, possessing technology that could render our arsenal obsolete. Fast forward to 1958, when the Soviets launched their own clandestine Antarctic mission, Operation Oasis. While publicly framed as a scientific endeavor, KGB files reveal a frantic search for anomalous electromagnetic signatures near the same coordinates Bayard had surveyed. One particularly bizarre incident involved a Soviet icebreaker's crew reporting a violet shimmer rising from the ice sheet, followed by a complete failure of their compasses and radios for 12 hours. The official report dismissed it as a magnetic storm, but the accompanying diagrams tell a different story, sketches of a hexagonal depression in the ice, its edges fused as if by extreme heat. The threads weave tighter when you examine Seraphim's own classified studies. A 1963 DARPA memo, partially declassified in 2008, details experiments with polar exotic energy extraction, explicitly citing Queen Maud Land as a high-yield test site. Another document, stamped Eyes Only, describes a material called isotope X, recovered from the region, a substance that, when subjected to high-frequency currents, allegedly produced self-sustaining energy loops. Sound familiar? It's the holy grail of zero-point research, tapping into the quantum vacuum itself. Bayard's disks, the Nazis' obsession, the Soviets' frantic searches, none of these were isolated incidents. They're fragments of a puzzle suggesting Antarctica wasn't just a frozen wasteland, but a vault hiding something far older and far more powerful than any Cold War secret. The real question isn't whether Seraphim found what it was looking for. It's whether what it found was ever entirely human to begin with. Dr. Ning Lai's office at the University of Alabama in Huntsville looked like any other physicist's workspace: whiteboards dense with equations, stacks of journals, a coffee-stained desk calendar frozen on March 12, 1999. But the real breakthrough wasn't scribbled in plain sight. It was locked in a filing cabinet, buried beneath grant proposals and lecture notes, pages of calculations suggesting it was possible to weaken gravity itself. Not counteract it with thrust or magnetism, but fundamentally alter its pull on objects. Her theory revolved around something called AC gravity modification, using high-voltage electromagnetic fields to warp spacetime on a microscopic scale. The implications were staggering. If her math held, it could revolutionize propulsion, energy, even our understanding of physics. Then, just as her papers were gaining traction in classified circles, she vanished. The timeline is too precise to ignore. In January 1999, Lai published a groundbreaking paper in Physica C, detailing how superconducting ceramics could generate gravitomagnetic fields under specific conditions. Peer review was skeptical, but defense contractors weren't. That same month, a redacted Pentagon memo lists a meeting between DARPA officials and an unnamed gravity research group at Huntsville, a city crawling with aerospace firms tied to Seraphim. By February, Lai's lab was reportedly swarmed with military liaisons, according to her graduate students. One recalled a man in civilian clothes scrutinizing her equipment while muttering about field coherence thresholds. Then, weeks later, Lai stopped showing up to class. No resignation letter, no forwarding address, just a single voicemail to her department chair citing family matters. Her house was emptied overnight. Neighbors reported men in unmarked trucks hauling away crates marked fragile electromagnetic shielding. The paper trail grows colder and more deliberate. A 1999 Air Force contract, partially declassified in 2016, references Phase Roman 3 testing of non-Newtonian propulsion at a facility matching LI's lab specs. The funding source, a shadowy line item called Project Tinderlos, later linked to Seraphim's Advanced Materials Division. Even more telling, the contract's technical monitor was a doctor. Richard K. Nowak, the same name as the Paperclip scientist allegedly involved in Seraphim's early propulsion work. Coincidence or proof of a continuum stretching from Nazi labs to LI's disappearing act? What happened to her research? Fragments surfaced years later in the unlikeliest places. A 2005 Boeing patent for a gravity wave generator cites LI's equations verbatim, with no attribution. Then there's the case of an anonymous Reddit user in 2012, posting scans of a notebook labeled AC Grav Final Notes. The handwriting matched LI's and the last entry was chilling. Field saturation achieved but containment fails. Subjects report temporal disorientation, recommend immediate cessation. The post was deleted within hours. LI's story isn't just about one missing scientist. It's a blueprint for how Seraphim operated, absorbing breakthroughs, erasing footprints, and leaving behind just enough breadcrumbs to haunt us. The real question isn't whether her work was stolen. It's whether it was ever meant to see the light of day in the first place. Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works division has long been the stuff of aerospace legend, a shadowy think tank where the impossible becomes reality. But some of their patents read less like engineering blueprints and more like pages ripped from a sci-fi novel. Take the 2005 filing for a high-frequency gravitational wave generator capable of space-time distortion propulsion. On its own, it's just another speculative patent, but cross-reference it with a 1997 Air Force research paper on electrogravitic propulsion, and a pattern emerges. Both reference something called the G-limiter effect, a phenomenon where electromagnetic pulses allegedly reduce an object's mass, and both list the same technical advisor, Dr. Hal Puthoff, a former CIA physicist whose name appears repeatedly in declassified Seraphim budget logs. Then there's the TR-3B, an aircraft so shrouded in myth it's earned the nickname Black Manta. While the Pentagon has never acknowledged its existence, aviation insiders have tracked strange triangular crafts over Nevada's desert for decades. Witnesses describe a near-silent, slow-moving behemoth with an eerie orange glow beneath its hull characteristics, matching a leaked 1992 Skunk Works schematic labeled Aurora Suborbital. The diagram shows a hybrid propulsion system, conventional jets for atmospheric flight, paired with a cryptic field displacement reactor for high-altitude maneuvers. Sound familiar? It's the same principle outlined in Seraphim's earliest theoretical papers, using electromagnetic fields to effectively slide through air resistance. But the real smoking gun lies in corporate acquisitions. In 2016, Boeing quietly purchased a tiny startup called Spectralab for its advanced photonic thruster research. The press release framed it as a satellite component deal, yet Spectralab's patents tell a different story, one involving quantum vacuum plasma thrusters, a technology straight out of Seraphim's playbook. Even more damning, Spectralab's founder, Dr. Elena Kovac, had previously worked at a DARPA-funded lab studying space-time metric engineering. When journalists pressed Boeing for comment, their PR team suddenly clammed up, citing proprietary national security interests. The trail grows hotter when you follow the money. Between 2002 and 2008, Lockheed funneled over $300 million into a shell company called VentureStar Aerospace. Publicly, VentureStar claimed to be developing hypersonic passenger jets, but their patent portfolio, now owned by Lockheed, includes designs for a room-temperature superconductor capable of sustaining the exact kind of high-energy fields described in Seraphim's propulsion studies. One particularly telling diagram shows a toroidal chamber labeled AC gravitational modulator, a near-perfect match for Dr. Ning Lai's missing research. What does it all mean? Perhaps the most revealing clue comes from an unexpected source, a retired skunk works engineer's memoir published under a pseudonym in 2019. In a chapter titled The Inheritance, he describes being shown a prototype in the late 80s that made the SR-71 look like a biplane. His account of its propulsion system, a resonant electromagnetic field that cheated inertia, aligns perfectly with both the TR-3B rumors and Seraphim's declassified technical goals. The kicker, he claims Lockheed didn't invent the technology, they inherited it, from whom he wouldn't say, but the timeline points to one place, the classified vaults where Seraphim's secrets were buried, or so we thought. Corporate denials, vanished scientists, and patents that defy known physics. This isn't just industrial espionage. It's the quiet rewriting of aerospace history, one acquisition at a time. And if these companies truly possess even fragments of Seraphim's legacy, the question isn't whether they've mastered anti-gravity, it's how long they can keep pretending they haven't. The most startling window into Project Seraphim's shadowy existence comes not from scientists or spies, but from the highest office in the land. October 2, 1963, just 10 days before his assassination, President John F. Kennedy penned a classified memo to CIA Director John McCone demanding full disclosure on unidentified aerial phenomena and all files concerning interstellar propulsion research. The document, declassified in 2017, is striking not just for its timing but for its bluntness. Kennedy didn't ask politely. He ordered immediate access to materials categorized under something called MJ-12, a code name later linked to Seraphim's Oversight Committee. Even more chilling, the memo's final line, "This matter exceeds the need-to-know protocols of my own cabinet." What could have pushed America's young president to make such an extraordinary demand? The answer might lie in 13 minutes of newly uncovered dictaphone tapes from November 1971, capturing a private Oval Office conversation between Richard Nixon and an unlikely visitor, Elvis Presley. The king, obsessed with UFOs, had used his celebrity to secure a meeting under the guise of volunteering as a federal agent at large against drug abuse. But the discussion quickly veered into stranger territory. Nixon, his voice muffled by the whirring recorder, can be heard saying, "You want the truth about flying saucers. They're not the real story. The space program's got something bigger, something that'll make Apollo look like a Model T." When Elvis pressed him, Nixon replied with 4 words that would later be redacted from the official transcript. But lip readers analyzing the tape's silent gaps suggest the phrase was, "We cracked gravity decades ago." The timing of these revelations forms a disturbing pattern. Kennedy's memo coincided with the Cuban Missile Crisis's 1-year anniversary, a period when tensions with Moscow were still white-hot. Was he searching for an advantage, or had he discovered something that terrified him? Former Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara's private journals, declassified in 2019, contain an eerie entry from that same week. JFK asked me about alternative deterrents, not nukes, but something he called cosmic leverage. When I pressed, he went pale and changed the subject. Nixon's comments to Elvis carry their own weight when cross-referenced with other events. 1971 was the year NASA abruptly cancelled the last 3 Apollo missions despite having the hardware ready, a move insiders attributed to budget cuts. But a recently leaked internal memo tells a different story. Lunar operations suspended pending resolution of anomalous orbital perturbations near Mare Crisium. Translation: something near the moon's surface was interfering with their trajectories. The same year, Soviet cosmonauts reported similar disturbances during their failed Luna 16 sample return mission. Perhaps the most haunting connection lies in Kennedy's final public speech. Hours before his death in Dallas, he spoke at the Dedication Aerospace Medical Health Center in San Antonio, praising America's quest to unlock the great mysteries of space. His closing words now carry an ominous double meaning. We set sail on this new sea not because it is easy, but because the horizon hides truths too vital to ignore. Was he preparing the nation for disclosure, or warning of forces even a president couldn't control? The tapes, the memos, the cancelled missions, they form a trail of breadcrumbs leading to one unsettling possibility. The highest levels of government knew Seraphim's secrets. And that knowledge, it seems, came with a price. The Vatican might seem an unlikely player in the clandestine world of black-budget aerospace, until you consider the Jesuit Observatory's century-long role as the Church's unofficial liaison between faith and the cosmos. Nestled atop the Alban Hills outside Rome, this unassuming facility wasn't just tracking comets. Declassified Italian intelligence files reveal that by the early 1950s, its director, Father Giovanni Galli, was quietly consulting with NATO Advanced Aerospace Threat Group on something codenamed Theological Contingency Protocols. Translation: what happens to Catholic doctrine if we're not alone in the universe? The real bombshell drops in October 1954, when Pope Pius Roman XII summoned an unlikely delegation to his summer residence at Castel Gandolfo. Attendees included Lockheed's then CEO Robert Gross, Douglas Aircraft's Donald Douglas SR, and a young Wernher von Braun fresh off his Paperclip transition. Official Vatican records described the meeting as a discussion on the spiritual dimensions of space exploration, but a memo leaked from the Jesuit archives tells a different story. Handwritten notes by Father Galli reference potential contact scenarios and moral frameworks for non-terrestrial intelligences, even more startling. A single underlined phrase, anima extra terram, souls beyond Earth. Why would aerospace titans care about theology? The answer lies in Seraphim's most sensitive subproject, communication protocols. CIA files from 1957 reference a team of Jesuit linguists and exorcists, yes, exorcists brought to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to analyze alleged non-human signal patterns intercepted by early warning radar. One document, stamped with the Vatican seal, proposes a startling theory that advanced civilizations might possess modes of consciousness incompatible with mortal sin. The implications were explosive. If Seraphim's tech succeeded in reaching the stars, who or what might answer, and how would the Church reconcile beings untouched by original sin? The Vatican's involvement wasn't merely philosophical. Father Galli's private correspondence mentions a classified stellar catalogue shared with the Jesuits by the U.S. Naval Observatory, a list of star systems exhibiting anomalous spectral shifts, some matched precisely with later Seraphim target coordinates, even more telling. In 1962, the Vatican suddenly updated its catechism to state that extraterrestrial life would not contradict the unity of creation. A doctrinal shift this radical doesn't happen overnight. It suggests years of behind-the-scenes debate and perhaps preparation. The final piece of this celestial puzzle emerged in 2009 when a retired NSA linguist came forward with transcriptions of Pius Roman XII dying words. Allegedly whispered to his private secretary, the ailing Pope reportedly asked, "Did they find the light beyond Orion?" A cryptic question, until you cross-reference it with a 1958 Air Force report describing a deep space radio burst originating from that very constellation. The signal's modulation, analysts noted, bore statistical hallmarks of artificial patterning, coincidence, or evidence that Seraphim's architects weren't just planning to reach the stars, they expected company. What began as a theological footnote now reads like a covert operation. From Castel Gandolfo's marble halls to the deserts of Nevada, the threads weave tight. The Church wasn't just observing humanity's cosmic ambitions, it was quietly preparing for their consequences long before the rest of us dared to ask the questions. Nikola Tesla's final days were marked by frantic scribbling pages of equations so radical his landlord reportedly found him muttering about tapping the wheelwork of nature. When he died in 1943, the Office of Alien Property seized his papers, immediately classifying research labeled dynamic gravity. For decades, those notes were presumed lost until 1986, when a Princeton graduate student named David Reynolds stumbled onto a declassified Pentagon inventory listing Tesla gravitic converters stored at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The document's custodian, a little-known Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency division called the Vacuum Energy Research Group, Seraphim's most secretive offshoot. What Tesla had theorized, and what Seraphim's engineers allegedly weaponized, was the concept of zero-point energy. Imagine the vacuum of space not as empty nothingness, but as a seething quantum foam, where particles flicker in and out of existence with unimaginable energy. Conventional physics dismisses this energy as untappable, but Tesla's notes suggested otherwise. His designs described a resonant cavity, a chamber lined with precisely angled copper coils that could, in his words, siphon the ether's latent potential. Declassified Seraphim schematics from 1981 show eerie parallels: a toroidal device codenamed Klein Bottle, its inner surface etched with fractal patterns matching Tesla's sketches. The implications became horrifyingly clear during an incident at Princeton's Plasma Physics Lab in October 1984. Security cameras later leaked by a whistleblower capture researchers testing a scaled-down version of the Klein Bottle. As the device activates, the footage distorts, showing a visible warp in the air above the apparatus. Then, without warning, a technician's wrench is ripped from his hand, spiraling toward the anomaly, only to vanish midair with a flash of violet light. The kicker: the wrench reappeared 3 days later, embedded in a concrete wall 200 feet away, still glowing faintly with residual Cherenkov radiation. Lab logs from that day, partially declassified in 2012, describe the event as a localized space-time discontinuity. Translation: they'd accidentally punched a microscopic wormhole into existence. But the most damning evidence comes from an unexpected source: Soviet plasma physicist Anatoly Bugorsky, who survived a particle accelerator beam to the brain in 1978. While recovering, he claimed to experience temporal echoes, glimpsing moments from his future. Intelligence analysts initially dismissed this as radiation-induced hallucination, until Bugorsky's 1992 journal surfaced, detailing a conversation with a visiting American scientist about vacuum energy experiments gone wrong. The date of that meeting, October 28, 1984, 4 days after the Princeton incident. What did Tesla's lost papers truly contain, and how close did Seraphim come to mastering forces that rewrite the rules of reality? The wrench, the wormhole, the whispers across the Iron Curtain. They are all pieces of a puzzle suggesting one terrifying possibility: some doors, once opened, were never meant to be closed. Brooks Air Force Base's medical archives hold files that should never have seen daylight: crumpled photographs of 6 men, their faces twisted in expressions no human should wear. The documents label them only by numbers, subject 4 through 9. Their eyes tell the story better than any report ever could. Sunken, ringed with dark circles, skin sagging like they'd lived decades in moments. According to the heavily redacted medical evaluations, these were the Seraphim 6, volunteers for a propulsion test so catastrophic it rewrote their biology. The incident report, stamped November 17, 1973, is a masterclass in bureaucratic evasion. Temporal displacement event is scribbled where a diagnosis should be, followed by 12 blacked-out pages. But the vitals chart survives, and it's horrifying. Resting heart rates elevated to 150 beats per minute, cortisol levels off the scales. Most damning, telomere length analysis showing cellular degradation equivalent to 20 years of aging, all after a 3-minute exposure to what's described only as field activation. Whistleblower testimony fills in the gaps. Dr. Elena Crest, a former Brooks radiologist who leaked files to the press in 1998, described the aftermath. They weren't just older, she told an underground science journal. Their nervous systems were out of sync. Subject 7 could recite conversations from his childhood in perfect detail, but couldn't remember what year it was. Subject 9's left hand visibly trembled at a different frequency than his right, like his body existed in 2 time streams at once. The most chilling detail comes from a nurse's handwritten logbook smuggled out in a veteran's footlocker. During debriefing, Subject 5 allegedly whispered, "It wasn't a machine, it was a door, and something looked back. The next page is torn out. What happened to the 6 after Brooks?" Redacted discharge papers suggest they were transferred to a Veterans Affairs facility in upstate New York. But cemetery records near the base tell a different story. 6 unmarked graves dated between 1974 and 76, each bearing the same epitaph, per ardua ad astra. Through adversity to the stars, their tragedy raises a question that still haunts aerospace ethics. How much are we willing to sacrifice at the altar of progress? And who gets to decide when the cost is too high? The answer, it seems, was written in those 6 faces and buried where few would dare to look. 1991 was supposed to be the year humanity finally planted permanent roots beyond Earth. Scientists had spent decades preparing for it, blueprints for lunar habitats gathering dust in NASA vaults, prototypes of closed-loop life support systems tested in Arizona's deserts. But behind the scenes, something went catastrophically wrong. That summer, President George H.W. Bush signed an executive order so heavily redacted that even its title was blacked out. The few unclassified lines reference an immediate cessation of all non-terrestrial habitation initiatives, citing unacceptable operational risks. Within weeks, 30 of NASA top physicists, many with direct ties to Seraphim's propulsion research, abruptly resigned. No press conferences, no farewell parties. Just empty desks and security escorts to the parking lot. The clues to what really happened lie scattered across declassified memos and whispered accounts. A 1992 Air Force audit obtained through FOIA requests reveals a staggering budget anomaly. $2.3 billion vanished from black project ledgers in the months leading up to the moratorium. The line item, simply labeled LUNEX, short for Lunar Experiment. Former Lockheed engineer Boyd Bushman, in a late-career interview, claimed LUNEX wasn't just about building a moon base. They were trying to activate something up there, he said, tapping a photograph of the Taurus Littrow Valley, the same region where Apollo 17 seismometers recorded unexplained harmonic vibrations in 1972. Not a reactor, not a weapon, a doorway. The physicist resignations tell an even darker story. Dr. Robert Jacobs, a former optical specialist who worked on deep space tracking systems, recalled a classified briefing weeks before the exodus. They showed us footage from a relay satellite structures where there shouldn't have been structures. Not ours, not Soviet, and definitely not natural. His account aligns with Soviet lunar probe Luna 21's final transmission in January 1973, which abruptly cut off after capturing images of anomalous geometric formations near the crater Lemonnier. The timing is chilling. 1973 was the same year Brooks Air Force Base logged the Seraphim 6 incident. Were these events connected? The answer might lie in a forgotten NASA memo from 1991, its margins crammed with handwritten equations later identified as solutions to something called the Krasnikov tube problem, a theoretical model for traversable wormholes. But the most damning evidence comes from an unexpected source: former Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney's private calendar. A single entry from August 5, 1991 reads, 3 p.m. JPL/Seraphim salvage assessment. JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, had no public involvement with Seraphim, yet a leaked internal roster from that era lists a special projects division staffed by exactly 30 engineers, all of whom left government service by Christmas. One of them, Dr. Linda Franklin, broke her silence in 2008 during a hospice interview. Her final words to the researcher: "They told us we were pioneers. Turns out we were janitors cleaning up a mess older than the pyramids." The moratorium wasn't just about shutting down a failed experiment. It was a desperate quarantine, an attempt to contain whatever whispered back from the dark side of the moon. And if the physicists who walked away knew one thing for certain, it was this: some doors once opened can't be closed from our side. Elon Musk founded SpaceX in 2002 with a seemingly impossible goal: to make space travel affordable through reusable rockets. But what if his sudden breakthroughs weren't entirely his own? The timelines trace a suspicious arc. In 2001, just a year before SpaceX's inception, Musk pitched Mars Oasis, a plan to land a greenhouse on the red planet. The media framed it as the whimsical dream of a tech billionaire, but the blueprint bore eerie similarities to a 1967 Seraphim subproject unearthed in declassified files, right down to the hydroponic layouts and radiation shielding specs. The Pentagon had labeled it Project Eden, shelved due to propulsion limitations, yet here it was, resurrected almost verbatim 4 decades later. Then came the Falcon 9's landing sequence, a maneuver so precise it defied conventional aerospace wisdom. Veteran engineers publicly marveled at its guidance algorithms, which adjusted thrust mid-descent with uncanny accuracy. But a 1979 NASA memo tells a different story. It describes a prototype called Dragonfly, designed by a Seraphim-affiliated team, capable of autonomous retro-propulsive landing. The project was abruptly mothballed due to energy grid instability, yet the schematics, now partially declassified, show grid fins and engine clusters nearly identical to SpaceX's design. Even the name echoes: Falcon, Dragonfly, coincidence, or a quiet nod to the program that paved the way? The connections grow deeper when you examine SpaceX's materials science. In 2015, the company unveiled a revolutionary superalloy for rocket nozzles, boasting unprecedented heat resistance. But metallurgists noted its composition matched a 1988 DARPA patent for a refractory crystalline matrix, developed under Seraphim's materials division. That patent's lead researcher, Dr. Leora Rosenberg, vanished from public records in 1992. Yet in 2010, a woman matching her description appeared in SpaceX employment logs under the alias Dr. Ellen Ross, listed as a thermal systems consultant. Her badge photo was blurred in leaked documents, but the handwriting on her technical notes cross-referenced with Rosenberg's archived papers was a perfect match. Most damning of all is the speed of SpaceX's progress. Between 2006 and 2008, the company went from exploding prototypes to stable orbit insertion, a leap that typically takes decades. Former employees describe Musk reviewing legacy technical packages during late-night sessions, files stamped with classification codes that didn't match any known NASA or Air Force archives. One engineer, speaking anonymously, recalled a whiteboard covered in equations Musk insisted were just thought experiments, until a colleague recognized them as modified versions of Seraphim's field resonance propulsion models. The real smoking gun might lie in plain sight. Compare Musk's 2017 Starship presentation to a 1971 Seraphim concept labeled Omega vehicle. Both feature tapered cylindrical hulls, delta wing configurations, and most tellingly, the same unorthodox belly flop re-entry maneuver. Even the mission profiles align. Seraphim's notes specify Martian colony establishment via serialized heavy launch, while SpaceX's current Mars plans read like a carbon copy. So how did the dots connect? Perhaps the answer lies in Musk's early meetings with the Pentagon's Defense Innovation Unit, or his mysterious 2004 visit to the now shuttered Lockheed facility where Seraphim's prototypes were allegedly stored. Or maybe it's simpler: when the government buries a technology too revolutionary to disclose, it doesn't vanish, it waits for the right moment for the right person. And sometimes the future doesn't just arrive, it comes full circle. In 2020, China unveiled what it called a quantum radar, a system capable of detecting stealth aircraft with impossible precision. State media boasted it could render America's trillion-dollar stealth fleet obsolete overnight. But when analysts dissected the technical specifications, something didn't add up. The radar's operating principles relied on quantum entanglement, a phenomenon so delicate it typically requires lab conditions colder than deep space. Yet here it was, mounted on a truck and allegedly field-ready. The breakthrough seemed miraculous until you compared it to a declassified DARPA study from 2004, buried deep in Seraphim's archives. Project Starlight's goal: entanglement-based detection arrays for non-line-of-sight engagement. The math was identical, even the hardware schematics matched, down to the hexagonal waveguide configuration. Russia's hypersonic avant-garde missiles tell a similar story. These Mach 27 warheads don't just fly faster than conventional rockets, they maneuver like UFOs, making 90-degree turns mid-flight without breaking apart. Western physicists initially dismissed such feats as impossible under known aerodynamics. Then a former MIG engineer leaked a document from 1987, a Soviet research paper titled Plasma Sheath Navigation. The diagram showed a missile encased in an ionized bubble, effectively surfing on its own shockwave. Sound familiar? It's the same principle described in a 1979 Seraphim memo labeled Field-Controlled Reentry Vehicles. The difference: Seraphim's version was theoretical, Russia's was operational. The smoking gun lies in the blueprints. Compare the Soviet Ekip, a saucer-shaped ground effect vehicle from the 80s, to the rumored TR-3B, the triangular Black Manta aircraft spotted over Nevada for decades. Both lack conventional wings. Both use a flattened, disc-like hull to generate lift through electromagnetic fields rather than aerodynamics. But the Ekip's propulsion system, once dismissed as pseudoscience, matches Lockheed's patented magnetic vortex containment technology nearly bolt for bolt. Even the power distribution nodes align, right down to the odd cloverleaf-shaped emitter arrays. So how did these designs leap from Cold War black projects to foreign arsenals? Follow the defectors. 1991 wasn't just the year the Soviet Union collapsed. It was the year over 2,000 aerospace scientists vanished from state payrolls. Some resurfaced in China's Shenyang aircraft labs. Others were spotted at Russia's NPO Mashinostroyenia, the very facility that birthed the avant-garde. Paper trails confirm the transfers. A 1993 CIA memo warns of dual-use technology hemorrhage through shadow corporations in Kazakhstan. One, listed as Vostok Nexus, was later tied to both Beijing's quantum program and a mysterious Swiss bank account receiving Pentagon contractor payments until 2002. The most damning link might be hiding in plain sight. A 2018 Russian patent for plasma stealth coating cites a U.S. patent from 1985, one held by a now-defunct defense firm called Astrotech. Dig deeper and you'll find Astrotech's founding CEO was none other than Dr. Richard Nowak, the same Paperclip scientist allegedly involved in Seraphim's early propulsion work. Coincidence, or evidence that the greatest arms race of the 21st century wasn't about building new weapons but unlocking ones we'd already buried? The implications are staggering. If even a fraction of these systems trace back to Seraphim, then the real Cold War never ended. It just went underground, waiting for the right moment to resurface. And the scariest part, we might only be seeing the prototypes. Luis Elizondo's resignation from the Pentagon in 2017 wasn't just a career shift, it was a detonation. As the former head of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, he walked away with more than just security clearances. He carried secrets, ones he'd later drip-feed to the public in carefully worded interviews. One phrase in particular snagged the attention of those tracking Seraphim's legacy: thermal signature reduction beyond known material science, translation. The infamous Tic-Tac UAPs weren't just fast, they were invisible to infrared sensors, a trick straight out of Seraphim's playbook. Rewind to 1984. A Lockheed patent filed under the name Project Rainbow detailed a cloaking system that didn't just deflect radar, it dissipated heat so effectively, targeting systems would register the craft as ambient air. The key, a metamaterial lattice layered with microscopic cavities that trapped and redistributed thermal energy. Sound familiar? Fast forward to 2004, when Navy pilots off the USS Nimitz encountered the Tic-Tac. Their flare pods designed to lock onto jet exhaust at hundreds of degrees showed nothing. No heat bloom, no friction signature, just a cool, smooth silhouette slicing through the air like a blade through smoke. But the connections run deeper than coatings. Elizondo's OTIP reports reference another eerie parallel: instantaneous acceleration without observable propulsion. Seraphim's files call it field displacement locomotion, a concept explored in a 1978 DARPA study on inertial mass reduction. The math suggested that if you could manipulate an object's gravitational coupling, it wouldn't just move faster, it would sidestep inertia entirely. Compare that to the Nimitz incident's radar data. The Tic-Tac didn't bank or turn. It pivoted mid-air like a cursor on a screen, hitting maneuvers that should have turned any known aircraft and its pilot into paste. Then there's the paper trail. Among the OTIP documents released in 2020 was a curious reference to a legacy aerospace project involving directed energy propulsion. Buried in Seraphim's declassified audits is a 1989 contract with Westinghouse for compact plasma containment systems, the end user. A black site in Nevada simply called The Cube, where retired engineers later described testing pulsed emission drives that left no exhaust trail. No fire, no combustion, just a faint blue haze, exactly what Navy pilots reported shimmering around the Tic-Tac before it vanished. The real smoking gun, though, might be hiding in plain sight. Elizondo once offhandedly mentioned that some UAPs exhibited transmedium capabilities, operating seamlessly in air, water, and possibly even space. It sounded outrageous until you dug into a 1996 Navy research paper unearthed by researchers last year. Titled Advanced Submersion Physics, it theorized a craft that could transition between fluid and gaseous mediums via controlled quantum tunneling. The author, a physicist who'd previously consulted on Seraphim's Omega vehicle deep sea tests. What does it all mean? The dots connect to a haunting possibility. The phenomena Elizondo investigated weren't just unknown. They were inherited, pieces of a puzzle left unfinished when Seraphim's vaults were sealed, only to resurface decades later, teasing us with glimpses of a technology we still can't quite grasp. And if even half these links hold water, the question isn't whether the Tic-Tac was ours. It's how many more are still waiting in the shadows. The voice crackles through the recording, distorted by decades of degraded tape, and something that makes the audio engineers at the Pentagon stutter step when they try to clean it up. You don't understand the cost, the man insists, his words stretched thin like taffy, syllables bleeding into each other as if the recording itself had been warped. He calls himself Dr. X, though the name on his security badge, half visible in the blurred Polaroid he mailed to an investigative journalist in 2003, reads J. Richter Level 9 clearance. His account centers on a night in October 1989 when a prototype buried beneath Nevada's Tonopah test range did more than malfunction. it ripped a seam in reality itself. According to Richter's fractured narration, the device was a scaled-down version of Seraphim's Klein bottle, a toroidal chamber designed to harness zero-point energy. "We called it the loom," he says, voice dipping into a whisper, "because it threaded fields together, gravity, electromagnetism, things we didn't have names for." The experiment was routine, another dry run to stabilize the containment field. Then the reading spiked. Richter claims the chamber's interior vanished from sensors entirely, replaced by a non-signal that made the technicians' teeth ache. "The monitors showed the empty desert," he recounts, "but not our desert. The sand was wrong, blue, like it had been bleached by a different sun." Then the accident. A junior physicist named Chen reached into the field to adjust an emitter. Richter's voice shakes, his hand phased, like a TV losing reception, then his whole arm. Then he was screaming about lights in his bones. The tape picks up Richter's own screams next, not in fear but revelation. "I saw tomorrow," he insists. Not a vision, a place, the control room, but the equipment was different, sleeker, and someone was wearing my badge. The recording cuts to static for 17 seconds before resuming with a final, chilling detail. The prototype hadn't just malfunctioned. It had anchored itself to the floor, its mass fluctuating wildly. The concrete cratered under it, Richter says, not from weight, from negative pressure. Like it was trying to swallow the earth. The aftermath reads like a cover-up boilerplate. Chen vanished into a military hospital, never heard from again. The loom was dismantled under armed guard, but Richter's Polaroid holds one last clue, a corner of the prototype's casing visible in the background, etched with symbols later identified as modified Tesla coil schematics. Even stranger, a 2012 Naval Research Lab patent for a quantum anchoring system uses nearly identical diagrams credited to a Dr. J. Rurke, a name that appears nowhere in academic databases. Coincidence or proof that Seraphim's darkest experiments didn't end that night in Nevada? They just learned how to hide the scars better. The Fermi paradox has haunted scientists for decades. If the universe is so vast and ancient, where is everyone? But what if the answer isn't that we're alone, but that we've already been the others? Hidden within Seraphim's classified archives lies a theory so unsettling it redefines our place in the cosmos, that humanity's so-called first steps into space weren't first at all. They were a desperate reboot after an earlier attempt ended in catastrophe. Consider the timeline's eerie gaps. The Apollo program's sudden cancellation in 1972, despite Saturn rockets being ready, left lunar ambitions frozen for decades. Officially, budget cuts, but internal meeting minutes leaked in 2019 reveal a darker justification. Risk of recontact. With what, the document doesn't say. Yet Soviet cosmonaut journals from the same period describe recurring nightmares of digging in the wrong places, as if some instinct warned them against disturbing remnants beyond their understanding. Then there's the technological leapfrogging. NASA early computers had less processing power than a modern toaster, yet somehow calculated trajectories with near-perfect precision. Engineers chalked it up to slide rule genius, until a 2008 audit found anomalous code snippets buried in Apollo's guidance system's algorithms decades ahead of their time, with syntax matching no known programming language. One retired programmer, speaking anonymously, admitted the team called them ghost scripts, added during late-night edits no one could recall making. The most chilling evidence, though, comes from our own biology. Human DNA contains what geneticists call a junk code, strands with no apparent function. But a classified 2011 DARPA study proposed these sequences aren't junk at all. They're markers resembling the kind of genetic tags synthetic biologists use to track engineered organisms. The report's conclusion: anomalous codon clusters suggest non-terrestrial intervention or prior civilization-level genetic manipulation. translation, someone or something may have tampered with our blueprint long ago. Now cross-reference that with Seraphim's most secretive subproject, the so-called ARC protocols. Declassified memos describe them as contingency plans for species continuity events, but the details read like sci-fi. Cryogenics beyond current tech, seed vaults on lunar far side, even schematics for memory encoding, devices resembling the crystal data storage theorized for interstellar voyages. Most telling, a 1987 Pentagon risk assessment warning that reactivation of dormant lunar assets could trigger undesired attention. This isn't just about hiding technology, it's about hiding history. The pyramids, Göbekli Tepe, the Nazca lines, what if these aren't relics of our past, but debris from a prior interstellar chapter? A civilization that reached too far, too fast, and had to start over with fragments of what came before. The Fermi paradox's solution might be staring us in the mirror. We aren't waiting for aliens, we're living in their ruins, rebuilding their mistakes, and praying this time we don't repeat them. From Nazi engineers whispering of gravity defying bells to today's UAPs dancing through military airspace with impossible agility, the trail of breadcrumbs spans nearly a century, and it's all pointing to the same terrifying conclusion. The evidence isn't just compelling, it's screaming at us. Declassified Soviet archives confirming joint US experiments in Siberia. Patent filings from defense contractors that mirror Seraphim's most outlandish blueprints. Whistleblowers like Elizondo and Captain K, their credibility cemented by government credentials, all describing technologies that defy known physics. Even the paper trail itself feels like a confession, blacked-out memos about field propulsion and non-terrestrial materials, budgets vanishing into shadow projects with names like Tinderlows and Longbow. This isn't conspiracy, it's a pattern. The most damning proof lies in the gaps, the missing years of scientists like Ning Lai, the unmarked graves at Brooks Air Force Base, the way every breakthrough in anti-gravity or zero-point energy somehow gets buried under layers of classification or corporate acquisitions. When Lockheed files a patent for a space-time distortion drive in 2005, using equations identical to Tesla's confiscated notes, it's not speculation. It's evidence. When China suddenly unveils quantum radars matching DARPA's secret 1980s research, it's not a coincidence, it's a trail. And when Navy pilots chase tic-tacs that outmaneuver physics itself, only to have their encounters dismissed by officials who once managed black budgets, that's not just suspicious. It's a smoking gun. The question isn't whether these technologies exist, it's why we're still being kept in the dark. Congressional hearings on UAPs are a start, but they're scraping the surface. What about the trillions funneled into black projects since the Cold War? The missing scientists, the patents that vanish into Pentagon vaults demand answers. Not from conspiracy forums, but from the halls of power where these secrets were forged. Freedom of Information Act requests, citizen audits, pressure on elected officials to pry open the vaults because every declassified document, every leaked memo, proves we've been lied to for generations. Now zoom out, picture Earth from orbit, a pale blue dot suspended in the cosmic dark. For all our wars and politics, this was never just about dominance between nations. It was about the stars. The Nazis dreamed of them. The Cold War's shadow agencies chased them. And today, whether through SpaceX's suspiciously Seraphim-like rockets or the eerie maneuvers of UAPs, the truth is slamming against the edges of our reality. The math, the witnesses, the paper trail, it all whispers one terrifying possibility. We've been standing on the threshold of the cosmos for decades while someone kept the door locked. The final question isn't whether they've lied. It's how much closer we already are than they've told us, and what happens when that door finally bursts.